Sun Tzu, right? He talked about how if you don't know yourself and you don't know your enemy, you are going to lose every single battle. But if you do know yourself and you do know your enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. So what I want to do in the time I have remaining today and tomorrow will be to tell us a little bit about ourselves and a little bit about our enemy, starting with our enemy. Now, from my point of view, from a biblical understanding of what's going on, clearly the commander-in-chief of the enemy forces is Satan. But we're going to look a little bit at what the mechanics look like of how this operates here in the world. So we'll talk about the deep state. We'll start off at the superficial level, then we'll get to the deep state behind the deep state. There's very good news. You have to be on the fringe, lunatic fringe, to not recognize that we have a deep state at this point in America. 74% of Americans in polls say that they do believe we have a deep state, defined as an unelected secret group of people trying to manipulate policy. At the highest levels of our government, this has been talked about. This is Richard Higgins. He put together this brilliant memo for Trump that Trump really liked, that got him fired by deep state swamp creature H.R. McMaster at the National Security Council. And he said the deep state is the successful outcome of cultural Marxism, a bureaucratic state beholden to no one, certainly not the American people, with no rule of law considerations outside those that further deep state power. The deep state truly becomes, as Hegel advocated, God bestriding the earth. Right? I don't know if he meant for that to have religious overtones, but it just was such a perfect summary of what we're dealing with. Globalists and Islamists both recognize that for their business to succeed, America must be crushed as a national and political identity and as an ideal. Right? So it's not enough to just destroy our country. They have to completely obliterate the foundations that our nation was based on, which we'll talk about tomorrow. The idea that all men are created equal. The idea that it's a self-evident truth that God gave us our rights and that government exists to protect those. So we've got a bureaucratic deep state. We've got something like 3 million federal bureaucrats, not including the 20 million at the state and local level. This is their political spending in the 2016 election. The blue is for Donald Trump. You guys aren't paying attention, are you? No. The blue is for Hillary Clinton, as you might imagine, and the red is for Donald Trump. So if you look at the bureaucracies, you break them down. Education Department, 99.7% of the money that they gave in the 2016 election went to Hillary Clinton, crooked Hillary. And DOJ is, 97%, and on it goes, right? The most pro-Trump bureaucracy was like 90% for Hillary. So that gives you some idea. Now, the FBI knows there's a deep state working within the federal bureaucracy trying to stifle Trump. They said so in this memo. We've got the Senior Executive Service. Anybody heard of Dr. Fauci? Put your face diaper on. Oh, just kidding. You don't need a face diaper. Oh, now you do need a face diaper. Now dance. Now stand on your head. Now you're all going to die if you don't do what I say. He's a member of the Senior Executive Service. So you have this upper elite layer of the federal bureaucracy, about 7,000 or 8,000 people. They are almost impossible to get rid of, and they are basically the top of the pyramid in the bureaucracy, except for the political appointees. And so I don't know, you guys probably never saw the show Yes Minister, a hilarious British comedy. But the civil service bureaucrats come in and they talk to the political appointee, the minister. Hey, minister, what should we do? And the minister says, well, go do this, that, and the other. And they say, yes, minister, right away, minister. And then they go and they do whatever they were going to do anyway. And that is what Trump is dealing with now. He gives an instruction, and the bureaucracy does whatever it wants anyway. About 70% of these senior executive service people were appointed during Obama's term. Here's another one from the SES, Lois Lerner, the one who is using the IRS to terrorize and persecute conservatives. Okay, they've got almost 500,000 federal regulations with criminal penalties attached to destroy their enemies. When a member of Congress tried to figure out exactly how many they had, the Congressional Research Service responded, and I kid you not, we don't have the manpower or the resources to figure that out. Nobody knows how many regulations could put you behind bars. There's no mens rea protections. It doesn't mean you don't have to have a guilty mind when you're doing it. Just you violated some obscure regulation you never heard of, off you go to jail. Now, the reality is probably most of us are not going to become targets, at least not yet. But if you help Donald Trump win the presidency, if you serve as his national security advisor and you know where all the bodies are buried and your name is General Flynn, they'll find something, right? According to Harvey Silvergate, he's a liberal attorney, he said the average American commits 3 felonies every single day, okay? 3 felonies every single day. So if one of us got on the wrong side of the deep state, it wouldn't be hard for them to completely and utterly destroy you. Now, I want to talk about the intelligence agencies a little bit, because these are a big part of the deep state. And they've pretty much come out of the closet during the Trump administration. Supposedly they're supposed to work for the president and the American people. Well, when Donald Trump started criticizing the CIA, this guy here, John Schindler from the intelligence community, he said, now we're going nuclear, okay? The intelligence community war is going to new levels. I just got an email from a senior intelligence community friend, and it began, Trump will die in jail. Who do these people think they are, right? Here's Chucky Schumer, everybody's least favorite communist, and he went on this guy Rachel Maddow's show. Check this out. He says, well, you'll watch for yourselves. Here you go.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
Yeah, you take on the intelligence community. They got 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you, right? That sounds like a threat to me. And when the highest members of Congress will go on television and say, oh, you don't mess with the intelligence community, they got 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you, you know there's a problem. And then, you know, the fake news will say, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. There's no deep state. Listen to the former head of the CIA talking about the deep state's war on President Trump.
Concern, and often used term about a deep state. Being there to take him out.
Thank God for the deep state.
Okay, yeah, so the former head of the CIA, thank God for the deep state, because we're trying to take out Trump, right? Now, the intelligence community is monstrous, it's massive. They have something like 1 million people with top secret security clearances. And, you know, I'm all about keeping America safe, but I'm pretty sure we don't need 1 million people with top secret security clearance. And as we'll see, the things that they're supposedly keeping us safe from, they're actually feeding. And the things that they're not supposed to be doing, they do. And the things that they are not supposed to be doing, they do. And they are supposed to be doing, they don't do. So, pretty incredible. They've also roped in Silicon Valley. Now, during the Obama administration, we learned a lot about what the intelligence community is really up to. They put out all these memos and reports. They even sent them to our local police. They said, we got to keep an eye on terrorists and extremists. And on the list were pro-life activists, Ron Paul supporters, people who like the Constitution, people who don't like lots of taxes, people who want the border safe, anti-communists, opponents of the LGBT agenda, opponents of mass immigration, opponents of the North American Union, opponents of a new world order, conspiracy theorists, and you get the point, right? Pretty much if you have a pulse and an opinion, you are on their list, right? And returning veterans, all you returning veterans, you watch out, we've got our eye on you. This is a slide from the Department of Defense. They were using this to train our troops. Religious extremism. And so, you know, we find naturally Al-Qaeda's on there, Ku Klux Klan, okay, there's Hamas. And then at the very top, you've got evangelical Christianity, right? You dangerous evangelical Christians. And Catholics. Any Catholics in here? Yeah. And then Orthodox Jews. You religious extremists, you. Now, supposedly they're keeping us safe from radical Islam and ISIS and jihad and terrorists and all that, right? That's what they say. Well, we have smoking gun evidence that not only have they not been keeping us safe from these things, they have been feeding the monster. So this is a smoking gun memo that we got out of the Defense Intelligence Agency in 2012 is when it was written. Judicial Watch pried it loose. And they say some incredible things in this memo. I think there's enough information in here to prosecute multiple senior officials from the last administration for treason. But what they say, these are direct quotes from the memo, the West, Gulf countries, and Turkey, they mean, you know, the Turkish government and the Islamic dictatorships on the Arabian Peninsula, support the Syrian opposition. Okay, we knew that. Then they say, they admit, the Salafists, right, the radical jihadist Islam type, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. So we support the insurgency in Syria. Oh, and by the way, it's being run by Al-Qaeda. Wait a minute, I thought we were at war with Al-Qaeda. That's what they said. We spent $1 trillion on this war on terror. And you're supporting a revolution that you're saying is led by Al-Qaeda? Something doesn't add up. And then they go on, it gets worse. There is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want. And this is what it looks like, right? Eastern Syria, right where the Islamic State popped up. And President Trump actually figured out what was going on. He read this memo and then tweeted it out. Check this out.
Our government isn't giving us good protection. Our government has unleashed ISIS. I call President Obama and Hillary Clinton the founders of ISIS. They're the founders. In fact, I think we'll give Hillary Clinton the, you know, if you're a sports team, most valuable player.
Anyway, he goes on. It's brilliant. And he kept saying it over and over again. So, and when he said that, the media was like, he's lost his mind. How could he possibly say that Obama and Hillary are the co-founders of ISIS? What? That's crazy. And then he tweeted out that memo that I just showed you, and everybody was like, oh, okay, let's just pretend like there's nothing to see here. And then they moved on to some new fake scandal. Right? Anyways, they're supposed to be keeping us safe from communists as well, right? Well, we know they have been engaged in false flag operations for a long time. We've got the documents, the smoking gun documents proving it. Operation Northwoods, this one strikes close to home. I'm from Miami. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA in Operation Mongoose were planning to bomb my city. They were planning to shoot down an airliner full of civilians. They were going to shoot a boat full of Cuban refugees and blame it on another government so they could start a war. Nice people. Okay, and then, they're keeping us safe from communists. Well, this guy here, Ambassador Earl Smith, he was our ambassador to Cuba during the Cuban Revolution. He said, in testimony to the U.S. Senate, we, as in the United States, are responsible for bringing Castro to power. He said, at every step of the way, we betrayed our ally, Batista, and we aided the communists and Fidel Castro. The New York Slime said that he was the next George Washington. True story. CFR member, Council on Foreign Relations member. The State Department sent him weapons. Okay. Meanwhile, a guy called Robert Welch was like, no, this guy's a communist. This ambassador, no, this guy's a communist. What are you guys doing? We had 3 U.S. ambassadors say Castro was a communist. Oh, no, he's the George Washington of Cuba. He's a freedom fighter. And of course, our intelligence communities treated them in that way. Now, again, they're supposed to be keeping us safe from communists. This is interesting because this guy was the CIA director under Obama, John Brennan. Now, before he realized Trump was going to win the presidency, he actually gave a talk to the Congressional Black Caucus. He's like, oh, don't worry about having a radical background. I voted for the Communist Party candidate in 1978, Gus Hall. Guy from the Communist Party USA, which was a known front group for the mass murdering Soviet regime that was pointing nuclear missiles at us. And John Brennan said, oh, I told the CIA in 1980 when I was getting my security clearance that I voted for Gus Hall. They gave me my clearance. And they moved him up the ranks so quickly that he eventually became the head of the CIA. Meanwhile, they're telling the American people, oh, we need all your liberty and trillions of dollars to keep you safe from communists. Wait a minute, what? That doesn't add up. James Comey, the guy who was running the FBI, he admitted in an interview with New York Magazine, in college I was left of center. By the mid-1980s, I'd moved from communist to whatever I am now. So he admits another former communist. How is it that former commies keep running everything? Here's Leon Panetta, ran the CIA and the Department of Defense. Another communist. He voted to give aid to the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. He voted for most favored nation status for the Soviet Union. He voted to surrender the Panama Canal to the Soviet puppet dictatorship there, and he was intimately linked to the Marxist Institute for Policy Studies, a front group for communism in America. Now, this was going on even all the way back to World War II, that communists were running our intelligence agencies. And this was interesting. Dick Novak in the Washington Compost, he put a column out there, and he said that, the intelligence agencies were infiltrated by communists. And this guy, he was the president of the OSS Society. The OSS was the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. He wrote a letter to the editor. It's still published there today. He said, oh, we weren't infiltrated by the communists. We hired them. Meanwhile, they were telling the American people that we need all your money and all your freedom. We need to spy on you because otherwise communists are going to get you. Meanwhile, they're out there hiring communists. Interesting, right? Some of the crimes they're engaged in, right? Torture, dropping bombs all over the world on people. Here's 2 of the children that they slaughtered with their bombs, right? 2 American-born children, right? They brag about it at this point. They don't even care, right? Watch. Here's the guy who headed the CIA and the NSA, Michael Hayden.
David's description of what we can do with metadata, quoting a mutual friend, Stuart Baker, is absolutely correct. Okay? We kill people based on metadata.
We kill people based on metadata. In the Constitution, we have these things called due process of law. We have the presumption of innocence. We have the thing where you get a trial by jury. You have an adversarial thing in court, right? None of that. Now we just kill you based on your metadata. Okay? Good. And we brag about it on stage. Okay, they've been spying on all of us. They got our phone calls, our email. They even spy on Congress, right? They even spy on their own people in Congress. This is Dianne Feinstein talking about how the CIA was spying on their committee. They were investigating CIA torture, so they hacked into their computers, deleted all the evidence, replaced it with fake evidence. True story. Watch. Here's Dianne Feinstein talking about this.
I have grave concern that the CIA search may well have violated the separation of powers principle embodied in the United States Constitution.
You think? Okay. Now, they've been running guns, right? They got caught during the Obama administration, sending all kinds of high-powered weaponry to Mexican drug cartels. Then they got caught. Oh, we were investigating some guy. Turns out the guy they were investigating was already on the FBI payroll. They've been running drugs, and they've been caught over and over running drugs. Here's the head of the DEA talking about how that one time he caught the CIA importing a metric ton of cocaine into this country in cooperation with the Venezuelan government.
That the government itself may have been running drugs. The head of the DEA at the time, Robert Bonner, said that a ton of pure cocaine worth hundreds of millions of dollars had been smuggled into the United States. And he blamed the CIA, saying the agency had joined the Venezuelan National Guard in drug smuggling. But the NSF said a ton of cocaine smuggled into the United States of America by the Venezuelan National Guard, well, in cooperation with the CIA.
That's exactly what appears to have happened.
So they're keeping us safe from drugs while they're importing drugs. They're keeping us safe from Islamists while they're sending weapons to Islamic jihadists. They're keeping us safe from communists while they're hiring communists and overthrowing our allies to put in communist dictators. Something is not adding up here, right? They overthrow governments whenever they feel like it. They funded the creation of the European Union. They admit it. We've got it in declassified documents. They were engaged in mind control experiments. We've got a lot of their documents, MK Ultra. They were force-feeding LSD to people in mental institutions, trying to shatter people's personalities. And I mean, just unbelievable the stuff they were doing. They hired hundreds of journalists, the CIA did, to pump out propaganda to the American people as part of Operation Mockingbird. Something like 400 of the top journalists in America were on the CIA payroll, including founders of some of the great American magazines and many more. It's interesting, William Buckley, the founder of the National Review, was also a CIA employee, and we will find out much more about him going forward. Now, the deep state money men, there's a whole bunch of these guys that provide funding for this, but before we get into them, I want to establish the credibility of a guy called Carroll Quigley, a history professor who mentored Bill Clinton. Here's Bill Clinton talking about him.
Then, as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call clarified by a professor named Carroll Quigley.
Yeah, so Carroll Quigley, well, he wrote a book. He was actually very close to the deep state. He was allowed to examine their papers, he said, for 2 years. He agreed with their agenda. He just didn't agree with the secrecy, so he put together a book, and they were very upset. But he said their goal was a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. You should get this book if you don't have it. It's Tragedy and Hope. It's pretty boring, most of it, but then there's these like nuclear bombshells buried in there that kind of give the whole game away. He said the system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion. You were going to have secret meetings deciding things. The apex of the system would be the Bank for International Settlements. Now, the Rothschild dynasty, the most powerful bankers you never heard of, they're kind of at the heart of this, and they brag about it. If you go to one of their bank websites, they say, we've been at the center of the world's financial markets for more than 200 years. We have an unrivaled global network. We can be closer to current issues than any other global financial institution, and that's not bragging. That's the truth. They're telling the truth. Even one of their apologists, this guy Niall Ferguson, who's a deep stater all the way, loves the Rothschilds, wrote a very interesting book called The World's Banker. And he says in the book, the Rothschilds had decided the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars by putting their financial weight behind Britain. Imagine the power of this family to decide the outcome of a war between the two most powerful governments on the planet at that time. Imagine the power behind that, right? Now realize that they're still around today. Everybody knows George Soros, right? A lot less people know that George Soros, his quantum fund, got its initial funding from the Rothschild banking dynasty. So you never get to see the top of the pyramid. We're allowed to hate George Soros. We're not allowed to talk about the Rothschilds. Here's Baron Eric D. Rothschild. He supported our good friend Irina Bokova that I told you about earlier. He wanted her to be the Secretary General of the UN. If she hadn't been exposed as a mass murdering communist, she probably would have been. Now, we get the idea that there's this huge array of independent businesses out there that are all competing in a free market system. Well, there was a really good study that appeared in Switzerland in 2011 in the journal PLOS1. And what they did was they looked at the ownership structure and the boards of all of these major international corporations. What they found was that they're all controlled by what they described as a economic super entity. And this economic super entity, the interlocking boards, interlocking ownership structures, goes back to the banks. And this is what it looks like. They actually graphed it out. I encourage you to take a look at that study. Now, then there's communism. Well, at least the communists weren't controlled by the deep state. Oh, actually, yes, they were. We showed you some of what happened recently. This book here is incredibly important. It's called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by one of America's greatest historians, Anthony Sutton. And what he showed, what he documented using the U.S. government's own documents, straight from the State Department, was that the leading financiers on Wall Street financed the Bolshevik Revolution to the tune of millions of dollars back when that was an insanely huge amount of money. Okay, and it went on from there. Then we built up the Soviet Union after these bankers helped enslave it. They print money. We'll save the Federal Reserve for another day, maybe. Then they basically rip us off and they stick all this money into these tax-exempt foundations. Congress has known what they've been up to since the 1950s. They actually did an investigation. In 2014, they found out that this billionaires club using tax-exempt foundations had basically created the green movement, the environmental movement, and was pushing the climate hoax that Dr. Soon just so eloquently explained to us. You've got these deep state foundations, right? You got Bill Gates with his foundation funded Common Core. Now he's funding all the global health stuff. You've got Soros fund Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, all kinds of anti-Christian groups masquerading as Christian groups. And their goal was actually to merge the United States with the Soviet Union. And it's not me saying that. It's actually the lead investigator for a congressional committee that was created to study this. Check it out. This is Norman Dodd. He walked into the office of the head of the Ford Foundation, and this is what he was told.
Mr. Dodd, we are here operating on similar, in response to similar directives, the substance of which is that we shall use our grant-making power so to alter life in the United States that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union.
All right, so that's what the big foundations were using their money for. And we found out some of the big foundations were actually run by communist agents. I mentioned Alger Hiss yesterday. He was the first Secretary General of the UN. Before that, he was the head of the Carnegie Foundation, one of the biggest philanthropic foundations in America. Again, a Soviet agent, right? According to this final report from Congress, they were funding internationalism or globalism, moral relativism, direct financing of subversion. It said they financed attacks on our social and governmental system. They're trying to produce oligarchical collectivism is what they described, what they were seeking. And they said there had been a revolution in the United States, in the past tense, that had taken place in the 1940s as a result of these foundations hijacking control of our education system. They said it never would have been possible if the school system had not prepared the way for it in advance. Now, that was in the 40s that the revolution occurred, right? And now I've only got about 1 minute left. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to leave us here at the deep state, behind the deep state. I'll pick up here tomorrow, and then we'll wrap up with the deep state. We'll talk about overview of America. We'll learn a little bit of our history and our incredible heritage as Americans. And I see Hal getting ready to take me out, so I'm out. Thanks, guys. Hey guys, great to be with you again. Thanks for being here. And I promise you guys, you know, we started off talking about public education and how we really had been dumbed down as a population. We've been denied the knowledge of our own history and our own heritage, and we've been denied knowledge of the enemy, the people who want to destroy our freedom and destroy our constitutional republic. So today in my last lesson, we're going to go through a very brief roundup of who we are as a people and who the enemy is. And we left off yesterday talking about the deep state, the intelligence agencies, and the bureaucracy. Today we'll talk about what I call the deep state behind the deep state before we get into America. And the reason it's so important to know this stuff, I quote Sun Tzu here. He was an ancient Chinese military strategist who's still studied today for his insights into the art of war. And he explained that if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. So that's why we want to learn about ourselves and the enemy. And of course, if you know neither your enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. And that's where we are as Americans today. So the deep state behind the deep state, we're talking about the kind of secretive and semi-secret organizations. And before somebody says, hey, you're being a conspiracy theorist, let's look at Mr. David Rockefeller, the late David Rockefeller, who went on to meet the Lord a couple years ago, and I can't imagine that went well. But this is what he wrote in his autobiography. This is his writing. You can find this at the public library. Some even believe that we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists or globalists, as Trump would call them, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. And then he says, if that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. So he's proud that he's conspiring against the best interests of his own country with a secret cabal of globalists to build a one world order. And that's what he says, right? They know that most of us can't read or won't read, and so they feel quite safe putting this in their own autobiographies. Pretty incredible. There it is, page 405. You can go read it for yourself. Now, on the education slideshow, we looked at the New World Order that they were building, so I won't show you all those videos again. But you guys remember this, right? Their ultimate objective
is to actually create a new world order.
Yeah, so that's their goal.
Bush kept saying, it was a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
So that's what they're up to, right? They tell us what they're up to. It's pretty remarkable that they tell us that they want a new world order with a credible United Nations, going to implement the vision of the UN's founders using the UN's peace troops, absolute barbarians. Now, we talked about Carroll Quigley. I showed you guys a quick video where Bill Clinton was thanking him. It was his mentor in college. He was a historian at Georgetown University. And he wrote this book, Tragedy and Hope. We quoted from it yesterday. And he explained that the argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals, maybe one of the right and one of the left, that's foolish. Okay, really, the two parties should be almost identical so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. Does that sound familiar? And then he says, this is incredible, there does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network, or a deep state, which operates to some extent in the way the radical right, which is anybody to the right of Obama, believes the communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the roundtable groups, has no aversion to cooperating with communists and frequently does so. Okay, so you wonder, why would Wall Street finance the Bolshevik Revolution? Why would subversives within the State Department and the New York Times push to put Castro in power 90 miles off our shores so he could point nuclear missiles at us? Well, because they have no aversion to working with communists, and they frequently do so. Right? It's the ultimate form of monopoly, total control over the population. Now, if you keep reading this book, Carroll Quigley, he identifies the chief outfit in the United States of this roundtable groups. It was set up by Cecil Rhodes, the mining magnate who went down to South Africa, backed by the Rothschilds, who we looked at yesterday, and basically took over the mining industry down there, set out to destroy the Boer republics, the Afrikaner republics that existed. He says the chief outpost of this international network in the United States is called the Council on Foreign Relations. So it's headquartered in New York. It was set up in 1921 after the U.S. Senate refused to join the League of Nations. Right, that was their first attempt at world government. After World War I, they said, hey, now we'll just have a world government. But the U.S. Senate said, absolutely, positively not. We're not going to participate. They said, all right, we got to get those wily Americans on board. So they set up the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, I want to show you just a couple quick videos.
666 Park Avenue.
Is it really? Oh my goodness. There you go. And we'll see as we go through this, guys, you'll see these themes keep coming up over and over and over again. Now, here is the Wicked Witch of the West.
Thank you very much, Richard, and I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, I guess, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have this far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
All right, so she was Secretary of State at the time, and who does she say tells her what she should be doing and how she should be thinking about the future? The Council on Foreign Relations, right? Okay. Now, if this was just a Democrat problem and we could just elect Republicans and be done with it, that would be nice. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Here is Darth Vader, a.k.a. Dick Cheney, the Vice President under George Bush.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
Ha, dumb voters, right? We never mentioned that when we were campaigning. So, there you go. Both sides, and I could show you videos all day of these people at the CFR talking about what they're up to. Here's some of the members, right? Basically, the entire leadership of both parties, tons of people in the House and the Senate, governors, secretary of this, that, and the other, tons of cabinet members. Here you get some sense of how much they dominate. You literally have, the top media people, the top banking people, the top CEOs, the top corporate members. Unbelievable. You even have some pastors and things like that. They have their membership rolls are online. You can go to CFR.org and look at their membership list. It's very revealing. And they have corporate members. And a lot of people don't realize, well, at least we can watch Fox News. Well, Fox News, the corporate owner of Fox News, is called News Corporation, also the owner of Wall Street Journal. They are also a corporate member of the Council on Foreign Relations. All the big banks, George Soros, on and on and on. And we had a defector from the Council on Foreign Relations. His name was Admiral Chester Ward. He was a U.S. Admiral in the Navy. Spent 16 years as a member, and after he figured out what was going on, he decided to leave and blow the whistle. So he hooked up with Phyllis Schlafly, one of the great conservative leaders of the last century, and they wrote a book called Kissinger on the Couch, where they just blew the lid off of what was going on there. And he said, and I quote, "The main purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is to promote the disarmament of U.S. sovereignty and our national independence and our submergence into an all-powerful one-world government." Okay, that's their agenda right there. This lust to surrender the sovereignty of the United States is pervasive throughout most of the membership. Okay? It's in the entire CFR lexicon, he said there is no term of revulsion carrying a meaning so deep as America first. And you wonder why they hate our president, right? They have a little magazine. Actually, Admiral Chester Ward said if you want to know the policy of the United States 2 or 3 years in advance, just get a subscription to their magazine. It's called Foreign Affairs. And until President Trump came along, you could count on it. If it appeared in Foreign Affairs as something to be supported, it would end up the policy of the United States within a few years. And Richard Gardner, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, actually admitted in the magazine, said, in short, the House of World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than the top down. An end run around national sovereignty will be eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. So how are they going to get rid of our sovereignty? They're not going to invade right away. They're going to chip away at it piece by piece. A treaty here, a global agreement there, a NAFTA here, and pretty soon we're not making our own decisions anymore. Another one of the key organizations is the Trilateral Commission. It's kind of like a more elite version of the Council on Foreign Relations. They have 120 members or so. They come from the United States, Canada, Western Europe, and Japan. And it was founded by David Rockefeller, the guy who was proud of conspiring with a secret cabal against the best interests of his own country to build a one world order. And he read this book by this guy right here, Zbigniew Brzezinski, also went to go meet the Lord a couple years ago. Again, can't imagine that went well. But he had written this book called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. And it's basically a giant marketing scheme for technocracy. You get rid of self-government and you have rule by elites. And of course, it's supposed to be for our own benefit. But it's incredible what he says in this book. I mean, he says America is obsolete as a concept, as an idea. This idea of individual freedom has got to go. The Soviets are doing something interesting. Marxism is maybe the next step forward in human evolution. But then after that, we need to go to a global system. And he advocates getting to this global system by imposing regional governments all over the world. So in Europe, we have the European Union. In Africa, we have the African Union. Here, they're trying to build the North American Union. Putin in Russia is building the Eurasian Union, and on it goes. Barry Goldwater, one of the top conservatives of the 20th century, he actually identified the Trilateral Commission as a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. And their goal, he said, is to create a global system where they will rule the future. Lots of other groups like this that are not quite secret societies, right? Council on Foreign Relations has a website. Trilateral Commission has a website. Lots of other groups like that. If we had more time, I'd go into them. They now have something called the World Government Summit. They meet every year on the Arabian Peninsula, and they bring together the leaders of the UN and the IMF and the World Bank and top government leaders from around the world. In 2017, they set up that arch right there. It's a replica of the Arch of Baal. And if you've been reading your Bible, you know that Baal liked child sacrifice and all those kinds of things. Not a nice thing to set up at your World Government Summit, but that's what they do. Anyways, Bilderberg is a semi-secret organization. They actually do have a website now, which is a rather recent thing. It's just in the last 5 or 6 years they created that. I've been to 2 of their meetings, obviously never as an invited guest, but they bring together about 120 of the most powerful people in the world and some useful idiots. There seems to be a lot of vetting going on there. They say, well, would you make a good president? Would you make a good prime minister? So, for example, Obama went the year before he was elected. Bill Clinton was just some no-name governor from Arkansas. He went to Bilderberg, and then the next year he became our president. You had Tony Blair, the prime minister of the UK, just some random parliamentarian, went to Bilderberg. Then the next year they made him the prime minister. According to the BBC, all the recent presidents of the European Commission, which is the European Union's executive body, attended Bilderberg before they were appointed. So there seems to be a lot of like, hey, why don't you come and tell us about your views on the world? Oh, do you like globalism? Okay, maybe we have a job for you. Right? Here's some of the people who show up. You probably recognize some of these faces: Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Colin Powell, Ben Bernanke, the guy who wants to drop money from helicopters. Here's some of the other, right? He was running the Federal Reserve at the time. So here you see Jeff Bezos, John McCain, Lindsey Graham. These are the type of people who go to these things. And they're semi-secret. You really don't hear about them much in the press. They have started putting out press releases and releasing lists of attendees. But I showed up at one of these one time, and we saw the list, and they had, I think, 120 people on there. And then we see Bill Gates sneaking in the back, right? And his name wasn't on the list. So just because they send out a list doesn't mean everybody's actually on the list. Now, they've been very open in public, some of them, about what they're doing. This guy, who's a British newspaper editor, Will Hutton, said it's one of the key meetings of the year. The consensus there is the backdrop against which policy is made worldwide. Former head of NATO said they give this report out at the end, and then obviously the participants are supposed to use that report in setting policy. I interviewed this guy outside the Bilderberg meeting in Copenhagen. This was maybe 2014 or 2015. He was the head of the Dutch Labour Party, leader in Parliament there. And officially, the Bilderberg says, "Oh, we're all here in a private capacity. We're not, formal, anything like that. We're not doing any decisions." So I asked this guy, "So you're here in a private capacity?" And he says, "Oh no, I'm a politician. There's no way of exiting my role. I'm here in a public capacity." This guy here, former Exchequer or the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the UK. His name was Dennis Healey. He admitted their goal was to build a world government. Of course, it's for your own good, right? He said, it's not wholly unfair to say we want a world government. Those of us in Bilderberg thought that we couldn't go on forever fighting one another and killing people and rendering millions homeless. We felt that a single global community would be a good thing. So, right, they're going to build a world government, but it's all for our benefit so we don't kill each other. They bragged that this guy who was the chairman of the steering committee bragged that they helped create the European Union and the Euro. Now I want to talk a little bit about the secret societies. These are actual secret societies where you're not supposed to know what goes on. You have to take secret oaths, and they do weird rituals. One of the big ones is Skull and Bones, not too far from here at Yale University. This is actually their logo, 322, right? The skull and crossbones, that's nice. And here is the former president of the United States talking about his membership there.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society. It's so secret we can't talk about it. What does that mean for America? For conspiracy theorists are going to go, first of all, it's not the nominee, and, but I was trying to try to lose. No, I'm not lose. You both remember the Skull and Bones, a secret society, yeah. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret.
Anyway, so you guys are probably too young to remember the 2004 election. That was, I think, the first election I could vote in. And we had the choice between George W. Bush and John Kerry, the two guys right there who were both on camera saying, "Oh yeah, we're both members of Skull and Bones, but we can't talk about it, it's too secret." So that's nice. You get a choice between secret society member A or B. Here's some of the other members, right? You notice lots of Supreme Court justices, presidents, cabinet members, CEOs of the biggest corporations. You see William Buckley there, the founder of National Review. And a lot of people didn't pay much attention to this secret society, but a friend of mine who I'm going to go visit this weekend, Charlotte Iserbit, she lives in Maine. She was the advisor to Ronald Reagan on education. And her dad and her grandpa were members of the Skull and Bones, and when they passed away, she inherited all their documents, all the contact lists and all that. So she took them and she gave them to America's greatest historian of the 20th century, Anthony Sutton. And he looked at these and said, "Oh my goodness, this is huge." And he wrote a book called America's Secret Establishment. What he says is the Skull and Bones is a recruiting ground for a conspiracy to create a world government. And the way they work is it's not enough to just have a left wing or a right wing. He says, quote, "In this dialectical process, change requires conflict, and conflict requires the clash of opposites. You can't have just a right, you must have a right and a left." And so you get a John Kerry on one side and a George W. Bush on the other side. They're both members of the same secret society. They're both going to advance the same New World Order agenda. And you can choose, right? Pick your poison. Isn't that cute? And we see this all the time, right? Another member of this secret society was William Buckley, who founded the National Review. And he was supposed to represent the conservative side. And anybody that William Buckley didn't approve of was radical, extreme, couldn't be part of the conservative movement. So isn't that convenient? They get to control the right side and the left side of the debate, and then anything outside of the parameters they said is extreme, kooky, conspiracy, radical, whatever you want to call it. Another one of these secretive societies is called the Bohemian Grove. 2,500 of the most powerful men in the world meet in the forests of Northern California, the Redwood Forest. This is an actual picture of what they do. They've got this 40-foot stone owl. True story. Actually, somebody who's at this camp this year leaked the membership list from 2019 to me, so that's fun. I'm still going through it. But again, they have 2,500 people. Every Republican president since the 1920s has been in attendance, except Donald Trump. And I'm going to show you a quick video of one of their rituals that they do. It's called the cremation of care. A friend of mine, journalist Alex Jones, snuck in there with a video camera, and you can see what they're up to. They're burning what they say is an effigy of a child at the foot of this 40-foot stone owl. Whether it's an effigy or not, I don't know. You hear this horrifying scream, but check it out. They're wearing their hoods and they got their torches and they're chanting about forest spirits. And if you're not a Christian, I'd love an alternative explanation for what's going on here.
So shall we burn this once again this time?
presidents, your Supreme Court justices, your senators. Anyway, and you can watch like 30 minutes of that video. I'll take questions at the end if we have time because I've got a lot to go through. Here's a picture of it during the day. One of my cousins actually worked there as a contractor before all the guests arrived, so he was able to get some interesting stuff. Richard Nixon, who was, of course, the President of the United States, he wrote in his own autobiography, the most important speech of his political career was the one he gave at Bohemian Grove, which nobody outside of Bohemian Grove heard about until he wrote his autobiography. He said it was the most important speech of his career. Nobody knew about it. Right, here's Alex Jones, who shot that video, interviewing one of the main members here. His name is David Gergen. He's been a close advisor to 4 presidents of both parties. Here's what he had to say. He didn't realize Alex Jones wasn't a member when he was confronted on the street.
Row of 4 presidential administrations. One last question. I read a Washington Times article many years ago where you had a comment about the organization, and then now it's been in the Wall Street Journal, it's been in one of our newspapers, and that's the Bohemian Grove. And back in, 1996, when you joined as a Clinton advisor, the Republicans were criticizing you, what about Bohemian Grove? And then you countered them by saying, hey, I don't run around in the woods naked. What does that mean? Here is the before-mentioned Washington Times article where he said, I didn't run around naked like they do.
I don't know what quote you're referring to. I'm not aware of any quote like that. Listen, I am a happy member of the Bohemian Grove. I like the folks who come there, and it's really inappropriate for me to talk about the group beyond that. Thanks.
Have you been there for the ceremony with the cremation of care?
Frankly, I don't think that's something I need to talk to you about.
Really?
That's right.
Well, I'm Alex Jones, and I snuck in there in 2000. I'm the guy that blew it wide open and got the video. It's been on national TV.
Well, I just respect you for that.
You do?
Anyway, and the video goes on. You can find it on YouTube. But I mean, that's real journalism there, right? Imagine if we had legitimate journalists in America. But anyways, the former Secretary of State Colin Powell, you guys might remember him as the guy who sold us the Iraq War. Oh my goodness, they got WMDs in Iraq. Don't mention that we sold them there. But anyways, he's the guy who sold us the Iraq War. He went and someone hacked into his emails. He sent an email to his friend up in Canada, Peter Gordon McKay, who was the Justice Minister, the Defense Minister, and he wrote to his friend, I'm back from the Bohemian Grove. I sat next to Stephen Harper, who was the Prime Minister of Canada at the time, had a nice discussion. Grove attendees know that Trump is a disaster. Most will vote against him. Right? So if the Bohemian Grove doesn't like Trump, that's good enough for me. And here's Newt Gingrich, who actually himself is a neocon, very establishment guy, but here's what he said about why the establishment hates Trump so much.
Now they're faced with a very real prospect of Donald Trump becoming the leader of the party, and it absolutely drives them crazy. They just cannot imagine sharing, because he's an outsider. He's not them. He's not part of the club. He's uncontrollable. He hasn't been through the initiation rites. He didn't belong to the secret society. And I think that
he hasn't been through the initiation rites. He's not part of the secret societies. That's why they hate him, right? Now, we found out from Hillary Clinton's hacked emails, thank you WikiLeaks, that her and her campaign manager, this guy here, creepy John Podesta, they were going to a spirit cooking party with Marina Abramovich. That's her right there. That's an actual picture of her. And the spirit cooking, they mix various bodily fluids into a big cauldron, and then they paint on the walls and summon demonic spirits. Here's a picture of her doing it. This is what the elites do, right? Unbelievable. This is a well-known lady. I was in Madrid with Debbie, and they had an art exhibit by Marina Abramovich right there in the UN hall, so everybody could see it, right? What a bunch of creeps. Now, it gets deeper and deeper, but we won't go too much into it. Now, I want to mention briefly the Illuminati. I don't know whether the Illuminati still exists today or not, but it is a historical secret society. It was founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. He was a professor of law at Ingolstadt University, and we know a lot about it because people blew the whistle, there were books written, documents were uncovered. Their goal was to destroy all the religions and governments of Europe and eventually create a world government. Their values were basically, like I explained on the first day, just flip everything in the Bible upside down. Dismantle the family, dismantle private property, dismantle the nation state, and have this global brotherhood of man with them in charge. Now, one of the ways we know a lot about them is through the book Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robison. He was a Freemason from Scotland. And he traveled through the Freemasonic lodges of continental Europe, in Berlin and in Paris and in St. Petersburg. And what he found was that there was a secret society infiltrating these Masonic lodges called the Illuminati, and that they were responsible for the French Revolution. If you know anything about the French Revolution, you know tens of thousands of people lost their heads, millions of people were slaughtered, blood running in the streets. They took a prostitute and raised her up in Notre Dame Cathedral and said, here, worship the goddess of reason, right? They hated God so much they got rid of the 7-day week because God created the world in 7 days. They said, oh no, we'll have a 10-day week. Okay, enough of that Christian stuff. So that was their handiwork. And it was a disaster of epic proportions. France never really recovered from that disaster. Washington, our first president, knew about this. You can find this on the government's website. He wrote a letter to a friend. A friend had given him a copy of this book that I just mentioned, Proofs of a Conspiracy, and he read it, and he wrote back in the letter, it's still saved on the government's website, it is not my intention to doubt that the doctrine of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more satisfied of this fact than I am. He wrote that back to his reverend friend. Now, these same exact values were espoused later by Karl Marx, right? Dismantle private property. Women should be held in common. Get rid of the nuclear family. Have a world government. Smash Christianity and the church, right? And so you kind of get a sense that these same subversive satanic ideas, at least, have been around for a very long time. They've been working their way into policy, into governments through the maneuverings of secret societies, the deep state behind the deep state. Hal has got a few copies of this special report we did on the deep state in the New American Magazine in the back. If he runs out, I've got a few extras. I think he's selling them for $1. And I'll have a book about this released next month if you're interested in going into much more depth. Now, the Bible also tells us about what we're dealing with, okay? And obviously the Bible is the ultimate source of truth, and this is what God tells us about what we're dealing with. In Psalm 2, verse 2, God says that the kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers conspire together against the Lord and His anointed. And so people are like, oh, the kings of the earth are conspiring against the Lord. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? That's really scary. Could that be true? Well, God told us it was true. And then we can really be encouraged. A couple verses later, God tells us what He thinks about all this. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. Okay, so God laughs at these guys. The Lord ridicules them, is what He tells us in Psalm 2:4. And I always think of Gideon, because people think, oh, we're so outnumbered. The bad guys, they got all the media, they got the schools, and what are we going to do? Boo-hoo, woe is me. Well, God is more powerful than all of them combined. He can flick them away, and that'd be the end of that. So, and plus, I've read the end of the book, and we win, and that's good news. So, very good. All right, guys, so that's the end of my deep state talk now.